On your Tuesday episode of Locked on Raptors, Darko Rajaković is set to be announced in front of the people. Today, we dig in a little bit more to our reactions to the hiring and what it will mean for the player personnel decisions that loom for the Raptors, especially now that it's official. Fred VanVleet has opted out as we all expected for the last year. This isn't a surprise. Stop pretending it is. We'll get into all of it with Vivek Jacob at Raptors.com on today's show. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, June the 13th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can go and support the show on your favorite podcast apps, of course. You can follow us on Instagram. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. And most importantly, join the Locked On Raptors Discord server. If you want an image of how unhinged it gets in there, last night, it's 60-60, tie game, finals closeout game, and the Locked On Raptors Discord was abuzz with discussion of whether Gary Trent Jr. will pick up his option or not. It was amazing. Eventually, I closed it and watched the end of that wonderful basketball game, as I think most of the other people did. But if you want to join and be among sickos, just like all the folks in the Discord, join now. The link is in the description. Come hang out. Super fun. Really looking forward to having you and loving the hanging out with the growing community of listeners around the show that we got in there already. All right. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right. Let's get started here. Vivek Jacob at Raptors.com is along, and the NBA season's over. Darko Rajaković is set to be announced in front of the people in Toronto today. And Big V, exciting times. Can you feel the off-season transaction hum coming into our ears now?
Well, first off, I would just like the Denver Nuggets to win championships for all of eternity, or at least the remainder of Nikola Jokic's career, because his post-game press conference was an all-timer. I mean, that was incredible. From, the disappointment that he has to stick around for the parade to the frustration at all the texts he's received to making a joke that no one caught on to and was like, ha ha, you didn't laugh.
Oh, he's the coolest, man. He rocks.
Yeah. Congrats to the Denver Nuggets. But yes, on that note, Djokovic winning the French Open on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Nikola Jokic winning the NBA championship on Monday. Mm-hmm. And now we've got Darko Rajaković being announced as the head coach of the Toronto Raptors on Tuesday. Serbia Hive, baby.
I have a dear friend named Anna who is Serbian, and she's very excited. She doesn't really follow sports at all, but she's on the bandwagon for all of the Serbia that's happening in sports over the last week or so. Very happy for my friend Anna and all our other Serbian friends out there. Is the reaction that Nikola Jokic gave to the idea of having to stick around till Thursday for a parade the same reaction that you have when I text you about coming back on the podcast again?
No. Not close.
Wow.
Close.
Thrilled. I'm honored that that's not how you respond to my
one
requests.
Of the benefits is that I get to do it from home. So,
that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
Do
you have a stable of horses in the background somewhere there?
If you ask me to drive all the way up to Hamilton, I might react like Jokic.
I don't blame you. Have you seen the traffic lately? All right, let's get to it, man. We are a few hours away at the time of recording from the introductory press conference of Darko Rajaković. We have not spoken to you, Big V, since the hiring of Darko Rajaković to be the head coach of the Toronto Raptors. So, what do you think?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a little surprised. I thought initially, with the waiting that was happening, I thought maybe they're trying to give time for Sergio Scariolo to finish coaching,
right?
With Bologna and then make the announcement. But obviously, they made the commitment to Rajaković, and I think everything that we said the last time I was on here holds true, where those four final candidates, I don't think there was a wrong choice between them. They all seem like basketball lifers. I mean, this guy started coaching when he was 16, and has been, around the league for a while now. When you look at, being a consultant to the Spurs, being an assistant coach in this league. And I think the way that the players rave about him, I had a chance to dig into that Basketball Immersion podcast where you really get to know his principles. And the one thing that really stood out to me was his attention to detail. Right.
Yeah.
And I think even when he was describing 2-for-1 situations, and it's like, hey, we have like a long 2-for-1 scenario planned out where maybe, there's 40 seconds on the clock and you want to get a shot off in 10-12 seconds, as opposed to, hey, there's like 35-32 on the clock, and now how do you get one off really quickly? And so that attention to detail stood out to me. And I think the swag element is definitely there. I think one thing I want to ask him at the presser today is, that line between, because he's coming from Memphis, that line between swagger and maybe arrogance.
Being Dylan Brooks.
Yeah. And how to manage that. But, all in all, really happy for him. Ride the Serbia wave. And from a development standpoint, this might have been the best choice out there.
Yeah, honestly, the more I think about it, the more I'm just really, really happy this was the choice. I think Scariolo would have been excellent, would have brought a lot of the principles that I think we wanted to see brought into the Raptors. I just kind of like the idea of someone younger, someone a little closer in age and sort of experience to the guys who he's going to be coaching. And then you factor in the player development side of things, where there's just like glowing reviews from everyone in Memphis and everyone he's really worked with over the years that this is just like a thing he's really good at. And that feels like an avenue back to the Raptors being the Raptors again. Again, no guarantees. We don't know how he's going to be once he's actually in the job, but all of the signs, again, if you haven't listened to it yet, you mentioned that Basketball Immersion podcast with Chris Oliver. Really, really highly recommend you listen to it if you're a Raptors fan, just to get a feel of what Darko Rajaković is all about. I retweeted it yesterday if you want to go and find it. But yeah, it's very exciting. Is there a player on the Raptors who you are the most excited for that he will now be coached by Darko Rajaković?
I think it has to be Scotty Barnes. I think when you look at Rajakovic's history, when I actually had a conversation with someone who covers the Grizzlies yesterday, and they were saying that the two things that he worked with Desmond Bane the most were his dribbling and his shooting.
Right.
And if there's two things I'd like to see Scotty improve, it'd be those two things. And so I think that actually it has to be, at the forefront of what the Raptors are focused on. And I would imagine a lot of the conversations sort of stemmed around, hey, this is the player we envision as the future of this team. How do you envision, building around him? And, what do you think he can be as, a completed piece? And so I think that is definitely the player I would list as, most excited to see.
Yeah, we're not in the room for these interviews, but I would bet my bottom dollar, to sound like an old man for a second, that he had a really compelling answer to the question, what about Scotty? I'm assuming that's exactly how it was framed in the interview as well. Yeah, I think Scotty is like the chalk, clear, obvious answer. I also think, really curious what this means for Precious Achiuwa. I've been thinking a lot about Precious Achiuwa over the last couple of days. Actually, been kind of going back and forth with some folks who do the wonderful Just Basketball podcast, Brendan Clean and Chris Manning, just because they were doing a Raptors episode and wanted to kind of ponder Precious themselves. And it got me thinking, like, what is Precious Achiuwa? His development last year kind of got stunted between the injury and the sort of uneven playing time and trust from Nick Nurse. And I get it. The offense at times can be an absolute ride with him. The defense, I think, always is going to play up. and really an important year for him, not just, developmentally, but also like financially. He is extension eligible going into this season. I'd be surprised, honestly, if the Raptors did extend him right now, just because they'll have RFA on him after the year's out, and we still don't really know what Precious Achiuwa is as a basketball player just yet, like what the full picture is. And I do wonder if there's just, the player development side of Darko Rajaković is able to kind of get in there, give him some more rope, and see if Precious is able to become a guy who you feel good about paying long term. We've seen it. You can get it back to the player he was at the end of the 21-22 season, that you are cooking with gas, my friend. We're going to come back on the other side, get into the other news from yesterday. I guess the big news from yesterday, even though it's not really news because we've been predicting it for over a year, and yet still the literacy of NBA paperwork just does not seem to be very high among a lot of folks. Fred VanVleet has opted out, and it's not news. We'll get into what we expect to come up with him and how he's entwined with the Rajaković hire in just 1 second. Before we do that, however, gotta tell you about our good friends over at eBay Motors. And look, the Denver Nuggets, they'll tell you when it comes to building a championship team, it's all about every player being a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that your part will fit or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only. Available to U.S. customers. Eligible old items only. Exclusions apply. All right, we continue on here. Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com along as we dive on in more to the latest around your Toronto Raptors. If you are jumping into the show for the first time, maybe you're excited for the Rajaković hire, go back and listen to our draft profiles from the last couple of weeks. We've got 8 guys profiled so far. Hopefully going to get to a couple more before the draft next week, including Scoot Henderson, who I'm going to do an episode on, hopefully on Friday, I think is when I'm going to aim, because you never know. You never know. There might be a trade there. We're talking player personnel moves. That's a thing that could happen. It's in the ether. Probably won't happen, but we'll still talk about Scoot because he's cool and fun. Big V. Let's talk Fred, shall we? Yesterday, he officially opted out of the contract that we knew he was going to opt out of ever since he didn't get extended by the Raptors last summer. This isn't news. This isn't step one of him leaving. He very well could leave. That's his right now. He's an unrestricted free agent, but him doing this piece of paperwork does not change, I think, the conversation that we've been having about Fred for a year. That's important to start with. Now that we know that Darko Rajaković is the head coach of the team, now that we know that Fred is officially opted out of his deal, well, how are you feeling on this one? Obviously, there are the suitors out there that have been talked about in kind of, broad terms. The Rockets, who are just lusty to spend all their money on whoever they can right now. The Magic have been thrown out as a team. Those are kind of the two main cap space teams. If the Spurs decided to get in on the mix, I feel like that would be a wonderful thing for Fred. I'd love that for him, to be the point guard to bring along Victor Wembanyama. There are sign and trade possibilities that are very difficult for a lot of these contender level teams just because of the salary implications and the hard capping, and it's tough to pull off sign and trades. It will be even more so for teams that are tight up against the tax. And so, how are you feeling about the Fred thing? Do you think the Rajaković hire changes it one way or another as far as the outcome that he's going to stay or leave? Where are you at on Fred, and what do you expect to transpire here now over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I don't think it changes too much. I think, if anything, you look at Fred's comments heading into the offseason about how the offense needs more structure. Seems like Rajaković would bring that to this team. And so, you look at the option, it was about $23 million. He knows he's going to get more than that from whichever team he signs with. And so it was a no-brainer to opt out of that. I think, in terms of the money, yeah, obviously, the benefits of the tax situation of being in Texas stand out, joining potentially a team on the rise. I do think, from what I've seen from Fred over 7 years, he seems like the type of guy that would lean towards a winning situation, a ready-made winner, rather. And so if that situation were to present itself, I think he'd go for it. I think Orlando, that's a team with their pieces already in place. They look like a team that's ready to take that next step. And with the shooting that he could theoretically provide, it would be a nice fit. So, I think the Raptors still have a good chance of re-signing him. And I think the money will be in and around the range that he wants if the Raptors want to go in that direction. I think there is a question to ask if the Raptors see this as the best move going forward. I think they will, primarily because you want to maintain the asset as a worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's where I come down on this is, look, I know that there are mixed opinions about Fred VanVleet out there, and I hear them in that I completely understand if you think that the Raptors would be better served with a better point guard as their starting point guard. Guess what? The odds that they can acquire a better point guard than Fred VanVleet this summer are exceptionally slim. The free agent market is light. Fred VanVleet is arguably the best player in the point guard market. Do we count Kyrie Irving? I don't really count him. He's kind of his own thing. I don't really know how to deal with that whole meatball. Whereas Fred VanVleet, he's a reliable dude. He is a champion. He is someone who has off-the-bounce three-point shooting. He can average 7-8 assists a game. He does a lot of very good things, even with the drop-off in defensive ability last season. And maybe that's a perceived drop-off that is going to continue as he moves into his late 20s and early 30s. I get it if you don't think Fred VanVleet is the best option for point guard for the Raptors going forward. You know what's bad, though? Losing him for nothing. That would be very, very damaging. And it's objectively true that the best way forward for the Raptors right now is to retain Fred VanVleet and figure it out later. I know there's all this sort of worry about the incoming cap, stresses and all of that stuff. It's true, it's coming, but it's not coming just yet. It's coming in a year's time, which gives you room to figure more things out, room to gather more data on this team, room to see what they look like with the reimagined vision of Darko Rajaković replacing Nick Nurse. And there's no argument that you can tell me that it's better for the Raptors to lose Fred VanVleet for nothing than it is to retain him, even if the number is a little bit squeamish for you to digest. And that said, he's going to probably land in the $28 to $32 million range, you would think. That feels like the sweet spot for him. And I think that's reasonable. I think if you go by percentage of the cap, I think I heard Blake Murphy cite this, $27.5 million is equivalent right now in today's cap world to what Fred's last deal was, which was what, 4 years, 80?
85, yeah.
Exactly. So it's not that crazy to suggest paying Fred 28 to 32, even if you think he's perhaps on the decline. Guess what? He's the type of player that teams are going to want to trade for in an NBA where there's just going to be a lot less flexibility. Player-for-player trades are going to be the ways that teams get out of binds and jumbles of their roster and their cap sheet. And I just think it would be really bad if the Raptors lose Fred VanVleet for nothing, even if you think that he is not the best option for this team going forward. I'm sorry. I don't think you can just hand the keys to Scotty Barnes as a point guard next season and say, hey, you're the point guard, roll with it. I also think that does a disservice to Scotty Barnes as a player development thing because he's not just a point guard. He can do a lot of different things. I have very strong opinions on this, Big V. Do you have anything you want to add to what I've just got laid out over the last 4 minutes of just incoherent rambling?
Yeah, not too much. I think at the end of the day, Fred is a very good player who will be in demand. And so if you look at, the recent history of the Raptors and losing players at the door, especially from that championship team, without really any return to show for it, you want to buck that trend. And so I think maintaining Fred in that regard is important. I think he still has a lot to contribute as an NBA player. And I think it's really important to look at all these dollar figures as a percentage of the cap.
Yep.
I think the numbers are so crazy now, right? When every time you say even with the Supermax, like 5 years, 250, it sounds insane. At the end of the day, it's 35% of the cap, just as it was, just as the way it's been since the latest CBA, right? And it was 30% before that, right? So I think those are the things you have to keep in mind. And so as long as he hovers, in that sort of up to 25% of the cap, that's not going to be a super difficult contract to trade.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you 100%. What do you think they do if Fred does walk? Like, do you think there's a contingency plan? Like, there has to be, because they don't have a point guard on the roster right now.
Yeah,
what do you think is the sort of reaction to that?
I think at that point I think it does kind of force you to go younger. I think then I think you do start to say, hey, okay, Pascal's sort of trajectory at this point, like if we're not maximizing his peak right now, we might as well maximize the return. And I think that's where you look at the situation and say, okay, it's time to go younger.
I sort of agree. I agree if there's a deal out there for Pascal that is proper commensurate value. I don't think you just trade him because some team offers you a bunch of half-assed first-round picks that are going to have weird protections and stuff, right?
I'd like to think that's a given.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing: is a lot of people are just like, get rid of him, go young. Like that's not smart, sensible team building. And I think, the Portland deal, absolutely. If Portland says yes, we will give you number 3 and Anfernee Simons and whatever Nas Little for Pascal Siakam. I love Pascal Siakam more than most. I like he's like up there with some family members for me. You make that trade 1,000 times out of 1,000 because it's a dumb trade for Portland to make, and you just have to do that if that opportunity comes up. I'm struggling to see right now, and I'm sure something will pop up. Some other team will miss out on their top target and have to pivot. But I'm struggling to see right now where they're getting a similar high-value return for Pascal Siakam, in which case I'd rather just extend him, have him on the team, and whether you have him theoretically grow into the number 2 next to Scotty as he ascends, or you trade him down the line, that to me, you can... I think that's the preferable outcome here to then just, trading him because you feel like you have to react to Fred leaving by just kind of leaning all the way into going younger. I honestly think, barring some big trade, I would love to see if Rajaković can make the Siakam-Scotty thing work. And I think he stands a decent shot of it. Yes, spacing's an issue. Guess what team had a lot of spacing issues last year, in the last 4 years, is the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, they have been pretty light on shooting themselves, and they've made it work. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying when you get to the playoffs that it's going to be a desirable thing necessarily right away. But I would like to see some proof of concept to see, hey, maybe they can build upon the good parts of the end of that 21-22 season where that was a very dynamic duo. Obviously, the Jakob-Poeltl thing complicates things, but I do wonder if maybe their response is, okay, we lost Fred, that stinks. Let's go get a stopgap point guard for a year and then reevaluate someone who can just kind of drive the bus, whether they go make a trade for Tyus Jones, figure out a way to get Kobe White out of Chicago, sign Dennis Schroeder. Like, I know that's not sexy for anybody, but like, he was a good player on the Lakers this year. A conference finals team was closing games for them in the conference finals. Maybe that's the way forward here, is you get a stopgap who's 75% of Fred for a year, and then you figure it out beyond that, point guard wise, once you have more info on, say, Scotty's viability at the position or whatever. It's not perfect, but I think that's probably the course of action here. That leads me to Gary Trent Jr., who has yet to make his opt-out decision. We're going to get to Gary on the other side and dig into his potential opting in, opting out. Will the Raptors try to keep him? Should the Raptors keep him? And how does Fred's decision ultimately tie in with that? We'll get to that in a second. Before we do that, however, gotta tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On. And it's a great time to make your way to FanDuel because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And let me tell you a little story. I made exactly one sports bet this year. It was in October, and I put down $10 on the Denver Nuggets to win the championship at 18-1 because I was like, they're clearly the best team. Turns out I was right, and I won that bet, and I'm retiring from sports betting now. I'm very happy about it, but if you want to go get similarly lucky on your futures bets, FanDuel is a wonderful place to go and do that. And right now you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get that no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, rounding things out here, Vivek Jacob, Raptors.com, getting ready for Darko Rajakovic's introductory press conference. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show, by the way, so keep an eye out there. By the way, too, on Thursday, Jamar Hines is going to be back, and we're going to revisit the game we played about a month and a half ago called Bench Guy or Goodbye, where we went through all the bench guys and had our takes on them, but we're going to revise those with the knowledge now that Darko Rajaković is the head coach. Could Malachi Flynn's career be saved? We'll talk about that Thursday. But let's dive in now to Gary Trent Jr., who I believe Thursday is the date for him to choose whether he's going to opt in or out, or it's sometime next week. It's sometime very soon we're going to know whether Gary Trent Jr. is opting in or out. And I don't think this is like a slam dunk, he's definitely opting out situation, V. I know that shooting is a sexy skill that all sorts of teams want, but I also kind of feel like Gary Trent Jr.'s skill set is kind of replicatable in a lot of ways. And I don't know if we're going to see teams go crazy to spend money on Gary Trent Jr. at a time where cap flexibility and money troubles are going to be like the prevailing theme in the NBA in the coming years as the second apron begins to hit in a year's time. And so where are you at with Gary? Like, I guess we don't have any like reporting or intel. Maybe you do. You work for Raptors.com. Maybe you got the goods. Let's see. But what are you feeling? What's your gut telling you about Gary Trent Jr. right now? And if Fred VanVleet does leave, does it become like paramount for the Raptors to keep him so they don't lose 2/3 of their reliable shooters all in one summer for nothing?
Well, so just to clarify, Fred VanVleet's deadline was the 15th, but I believe Gary Trent Jr.'s is the 20th. So
Gotcha. Okay.
So there's a bit more time for Gary. I do, view Gary's situation as far as the Raptors front office is concerned is not as serious, right?
Okay.
I think you can lose Gary and be okay. To your point about losing both Gary and Fred, I think that would be significant considering the shooting on this team. And so that's where, again, I lean towards just, hey, let's find a solid number to re-sign him. I think the season that he's had lends towards being able to do so. And so if you can figure out that number and bring him back, I think that makes the most sense. And then you just go from there. And, we've referenced multiple times that the front office has kind of dug themselves a hole with the re-signings that they have to do and the inflexibility that'll give them in, really altering this roster for this upcoming season. Mm-hmm. And, maybe that's something that works out for the front office in terms of being able to assess Rajaković with this roster and then being able to make a decision, right? Yeah. And say, hey, was this a case of chemistry just going out the window and culture losing that a bit? And what does it look like with everything kind of coming back together and mm-hmm. then being able to assess? So that's the aspect that could work out in the front office's favor. But obviously that all begins with actually re-signing these players. And so if this does become, it can almost become like a nail in the coffin for this iteration of the team if you were to lose both those guys out the window without any kind of return.
Yeah, I mean, it would indicate a pretty gross miscalculation of their chances of keeping both of them.
Yeah.
And, you would hope that the new coach maybe refreshes their outlook on potentially coming back. I don't think it's any secret that Gary Trent Jr. and Nick Nurse maybe were not on the greatest of terms. Like, the call outs, obviously Gary responded pretty well, but I can't imagine he'd be like upset about the idea of a new coach on the team, considering what we now know. I think it has to be you keep one of them at the very least. Like if you keep both, obviously the money gets pretty tricky. But again, the real cap crunch comes a year from now, and you can still find ways to trim money, whether it's a Boucher trade or you waive that, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, you can't just lose both of them for nothing, man. Like, and I don't see Gary Trent Jr. being the kind of guy you can get much back for in a sign and trade. Fred, I think if a contender is incentivized to go after Fred, you can probably figure out something to get something in return there. I don't think Gary Trent Jr. is a good enough basketball player to warrant some team going through all the hoops that are required to jump through for a sign and trade and all the ways it can kind of handcuff you, hard capping, etc. Like I don't know if he's that level of player. And so, yeah, it's tough to sort out. Not having both of those shooters would be really, really damaging, man. I don't know how else to put it. It would be just a really, really hard thing for the front office to justify. I'm sure they have their contingency plans, but man, it would be pretty grim if that were the case. What are your thoughts on Gary fitting into like a different style of offense, like the one that Rajaković kind of professes to be about? And honestly, defense, I think, is a question here too. Offensively, he obviously brings the shooting and the spacing. You can run him around off screens, do that whole thing. There's a lot to like there. It's inconsistent. His playmaking has always kind of been a little His passing is not really there, which you would figure is going to be a priority for most guys in a Rajaković system to have at least some passing chops. And then on defense, I'm a little concerned that if they dial back the aggression, which I'm assuming they will without Nick Nurse running the show, does Gary Trent Jr. really have anything to do on defense other than get pinpointed and targeted by mismatches, right? Because, like, if you're not building in opportunities for him to jump passing lanes and gamble and be the steals merchant that he is, what does he really do well? I guess is my question. Does it matter that he might not be like a perfect fit for the Rajaković system if they lose Fred and they need to keep him anyway? If they keep Fred, I think it's totally justifiable to let him walk just because of the money and because, again, I think his skill set, while the shooting's valuable, is more replaceable than Fred's. But, it's an interesting one, kind of imagining how he fits into a Rajaković system. Like, I can easily envision Pascal, Scotty, OG, Yak, Fred working well within a revitalized, revamped offense. Gary Trent Jr. is a little bit more of a question to me.
So for me, I think, going back to that Basketball Immersion podcast, one of his core principles was paint to great and being able to create enough dribble penetration and attacking the paint with force to create great looks. And so when I think of that, I think of Gary Trent Jr. being on the end of those plays.
Yeah.
And so I think there is value there. You're not going to envision him as potentially a Scotty and Pascal and Fred, trying to create those looks. But I do think Gary has value in being on the end of those looks. And so
got to have a trigger, man.
Yeah. And as far as the defense goes, he was challenged with, really getting into passing lanes and really ramping up the aggressiveness. And I think it maximized his value, even if it didn't, make him even like an average defender. And so I think that's where it's just going to be a challenge no matter what. But I think, that is part of the challenge for a coach. And no one is expecting Rajaković to be Eric Spoelstra in his first season, or ever for that matter. But I think
you speak for yourself. I have very lofty expectations for you.
But you see that part of the challenge for Spoelstra was, hey, how do I get Max Strus and Duncan Robinson to be serviceable enough where they can provide that value that they provide on the other end of the floor? And I think that is part of the equation with the Rajaković. If he gets an opportunity to coach a Gary Trent Jr., it's just, hey, how do I get him to be serviceable enough on the defensive end to extract that value that he can provide on the offensive end?
Yeah, and I mean, he's the type of guy, it seems, who would give a lot of rope and runway to sort of figure out that idealized version of Gary Trent Jr. within whatever his offense is going to be. And so, yeah, like I said, I think you got to keep one of them at the very least. And if Fred's gone, I think bringing back Gary almost becomes like higher priority than Yak, frankly. Like, just because of the pure need for shooting and the difficulty of going out and finding it and losing again. 2 of your 3 knockdown shooters in one fell swoop is bad. I would hate it. It would be very, very, very damaging. Feel like that's about it. Man, this is going to be a fascinating few weeks. I am excited, a little scared, a little queasy, kind of want to barf a little bit, but man, this is going to be... I'm ready for the Raptors to appear on like every single listicle of most interesting off-season teams around the internet. That's going to be fun. Do you have any parting shots here before we let you go and you head off to go and be there for Darko Rajakovic's debut press conference?
Yeah, not too much. What I will tease is I am going to get a one-on-one opportunity with Darko.
Hell yeah.
And
you're just going to ask him all about Novak, aren't you?
And so you can look out for maybe something a bit different for Raptors.com tomorrow.
Cool.
And yeah, besides that, you can follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob, where I will probably live tweet the press conference if you're not able to watch it. And follow along there.
Everyone, go do it. Big V, he's one of the best. And thanks for hanging out here today, buddy. We'll be back again tomorrow as we react to the Darko Rajaković press conference and pull our big takeaways. Surely, we'll contort words and take things out of context the way we have to do it on the internet, baby. Thursday, again, Jamar Hines will be along. We will dig into the revisiting of Bench Guy or Goodbye from about a month ago. Talk about Scoot Henderson on Friday. I think we'll probably get Katie Heindel along for tomorrow's show. So that'll be fun too. Miss Katie, haven't had her on in a bit. So thanks so much. Also, if you haven't yet, go listen to yesterday's episode where we reacted to the Rajaković news and had DeMichael Cole from Locked On Grizzlies on to give us a little intel on his track record as a personnel guy, a player development guy, and just kind of like how he is as a dude, how cool he is as a dude, frankly. That was the number one adjective used by DeMichael, was cool, in describing Darko, which is music to my ears. I like cool over competent anytime, and it seems like he's probably both, which is the best of both worlds, baby. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. Please go to the Discord. The link is in the description. Come hang out. We'll talk off season. We'll talk about Blue Jays baseball, which is kind of depressing these days. But sports are about being sad among friends. So come hang out in the Locked On Raptors Discord, a lovely growing community around the show where you don't get yelled at when you get disagreed with. It's beautiful. And we'll talk to you again on Wednesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.